social justice. What is social justice? For those watching by Facebook, we're going to only be doing like 15, maybe 20 minutes of discussion because we have some video clips we want to show the people here. So I just want to be aware that once we start playing the video clips, we'll go off and we'll be done for tonight. But I kind of want to do like a little bit of overview of what's going on, kind of review. We started off 2 weeks ago dealing with what is worldliness. And do you remember what we said about worldliness and how we define worldliness?
It's what we allow into our minds, just our thinking and behaviors, not just what we do or don't do. It's more than...
It's a philosophical or intellectual structure, worldview in which we live by. And for us as believers, we're supposed to be using the structures given to us to provide our worldview through biblical usages. And so today, a lot of things, even thinking about things biblically, we tend to bring in the culture, the philosophies of this world into how we are thinking as Bible people, and that begins to put Christians in a tough spot because now we are playing by the world's rules, which are, as we know, subjective, relative. They can change at a moment's notice. They can redefine words, and we'll see that here in a few minutes. They can tell us what is right and wrong one year, and the next year they can change those rules. And so there's only one objective truth, and that is the Bible. And so we have to understand that we must stand on the Bible, try to use biblical terminology, try to use as best as possible those things that helps us stand on objective truth, being God himself, being his word. And so when we bring in worldly philosophies and cultures into the church, into our thinking, we are acting worldly. Now last week we dealt with justice. We define justice, and we use two different definitions to help us understand biblical justice, because that's important. Justice itself, even on a normal scale, justice itself would be helpful. Jerry Bridges defines justice as rendering to everyone according to one's due. Rendering to everyone according to one's due. Justice means we get exactly what we deserve. Nothing more, nothing less, right? So if we run a red light, the cop pulls us over, he gives us a ticket, justice was served, right? Because we broke the law, the ticket was given, justice served. But when we think of justice, when we think of it, we understand it both in a societal instance and a biblical point as prescriptive and retributive. Justice is primary retributive, meaning that if you break the law, you're going to pay a punishment. But social justice is entirely different than that. Social justice then explains and changes the meaning of the word, and we begin to see how this happens when William Young defines social justice as the redistribution of advantages and resources to disadvantaged groups to satisfy their rights to social and economic equality. Social justice, again, William Young defines it, and you can look at similar definitions, even going to the Oxford English Language Dictionary. Defines social justice as the redistribution of advantages and resources to disadvantaged groups to satisfy their rights to social and economic equality. You can see where this can be very problematic. A, because they changed the definition of justice from thousands of years of use to now the redistributive aspect instead of a punitive or retributive aspect. Because now we live in a world where we have two social justice groups, Group A and Group B, appear on different sides of the issue, because Group A says that this particular side of the social justice group is social justice, while Group B says, no, this is a social justice issue. Case in point, abortion. You have one side that says it's a social justice issue because you cannot refuse the right for a woman to choose her health care over her body. Right? Social justice issue. Group B says, no, the unborn is still a human, and this is a social justice issue. But they both can't be right. In the social justice realm, they both can't be right. For you see, social justice isn't really about justice. It's about redistributing power, redistributing finances, wealth. And if you've had any sort of history, you begin to see where this is coming from. I mean, we read Micah 6, 1, 8 through 8 last week, and we can read it again, Micah 6, 1 through 8 again. Hear ye now what the Lord saith, arise, contend thou before the mountains, and let the hills hear thy voice. Hear ye, O mountains, the Lord's controversy, and ye strong foundations of the earth. For the Lord hath a controversy with his people, and he will plead with Israel. O my people, what have I done unto thee, and wherein have I wearied thee? Testify against me, for I brought thee up out of the land of Egypt, and redeemed thee out of the house of servants. And I sent before thee Moses, Aaron, and Miriam. O my people, remember now what Balak king of Moab consulted, and what Balaam the son of Beor answered him from Shittim unto Gilgal, that ye may know the righteousness of the Lord. Wherewith shall I come before the Lord, and bow myself before the high God? Shall I come before him with burnt offerings, with calves of a year old? Will the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams, or with 10,000s of rivers of oil? Shall I give my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul? And then the most common phrase, or the verse that we know of mostly from Micah 6:8. He hath showed thee, O man, what is good. And what doth the Lord require of thee, but to do justly, to do justice, to love mercy, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with thy God. But to really get into social justice, we can't really deal with social justice unless we deal with critical theory, and then critical race theory, and then intersectionality. Because all those play a part in how we are living in society, and how this is all running at a rampant pace, if you will, of evangelicals, or churches in general. Critical theory functions as a worldview. We have our worldview. This is our worldview, the Bible. This is how we Christians should function within this worldview. This is how God prescribes us to function. But critical theory comes in and says, well, no, this is how we're going to look at the world. This is how we're going to look at philosophy. This is how we're going to look at the sciences. This is how we're going to look at math. This is how we're going to look at the languages and culture. This defines who we are. This will define us, that we have a fundamental problem. This defines a solution to that problem. What is our primary moral duty? How should we live? This worldview thinking answers all these questions. Very much the same thing that Christianity answers those questions as well. In Christianity, for example, our narrative of our story begins all the way back to Garden of Eden with creation. It runs through redemption and then to glorification. We are creatures who are made in God's image, right? First, Genesis chapter 1. What happens in Genesis 3? Adam and Eve sin. Adam plunges the entire human race into sin. We need to be redeemed. So Jesus comes along with his atoning work, his perfect submission to the Father's will. And he calls us, after we are redeemed, to love both God and neighbor. However, if you were to look at it from a critical theorist standpoint, and how, if you begin to see these things happen in the news and in the world around us, the story begins from oppressed to liberation. We are either members of a dominant group or a member of an oppressed group. And we're given certain identity markers to help us understand if we're part of the oppressed group or part of the dominant group. For instance, in this setting we're sitting in today, my identity marker would tell me that I'm the oppressor. We have women in here tonight. Their identity marker would tell them that they are the oppressed. Not because they're a minority, and we'll see this later, but they're a majority in that there are more women in the world than men, but because their identity markers consider that they're a part of the oppressed group. So, for us to be quote-unquote saved, I need to divest myself of power and give it to the oppressed group. Or those who are in the oppressed group need to acquire power and liberate themselves from all the structures, all edifices of keeping you in the oppressed society. So in critical theory, the greatest sin is then what? Oppression. And you achieve liberation, or you achieve the greatest virtue in the pursuit of liberation. Christianity, our identity is primarily defined by whom? Christ. Not in critical theory. Your identity is identified by what marker you are. Whether you're male, female, LGBTQ+, certain ethnicities, certain economic status, certain ability or disability status. So critical theory develops at their terms on a horizontal plane, and we're looking at a vertical plane. Our fundamental problem is sin, and the point that Adam plunged humanity into sin. In critical theory, our fundamental problem is oppression, or being oppressed. And you can see how all of these, there's points of tensions as we begin to look at all of these different points on this grid. You begin to see that you may be part of an oppressed group now, but there are people that you are oppressing. And that list can go on and on and on. So the goal then of social justice, based on this theory, or theories, is full and equal participation of all groups in a society that is mutually shaped to meet their needs. So that includes a vision of society where all needs are met, the distribution of resources that's equitable, and all members are physically and psychologically safe and secure. And you can read more about these things. I'll give you some names. Neil Shenvi and Pat Sawyer, they've written from a Christian perspective about these things. You can listen to Daryl Harrison and Virgil Walker on the Just Thinking podcast. You can listen to John MacArthur has a series of blog posts on this. You can look at James Lindsay. He's actually an agnostic dealing with this. James McWhorter and Greg Lowry, also university professors at Brown and at Columbia, who are very much against these things. We'll look at a clip from Vodi Bakum tonight. He's very much against these things. And so, again, in the society in which we are, and we'll take questions here in a moment, the social justice, and we'll hear this repeatedly on the news, you'll hear critical theory, you'll hear woke, you'll hear white supremacy, you'll hear white privilege. All these things have to deal, and they're combined into critical theory, and their goal is to fully and equally participate, that all groups in society are mutually shaped to meet their needs. So you can go ahead and turn this off. Hopefully that may be out to those watching.